NBA players around the league are now sounding off that the MVP new rules and regulations is a little bit too strict, that having to play 65 games is a little bit too strict, and it's going to, like Draymond Green say, incentivize players playing hurt. Now, this is total BS, and I say this for one thing, but I'm gonna get to that a little bit later in the video. But the idea that you have to play around 80% of the season is really not that crazy of an idea. It really isn't. I mean, I feel like in other leagues, they probably have some rules similar to, playing 80 games or playing 80% of the games of the season or some percentage of the game so you can qualify for certain awards. But just imagine how some players would feel that if a player who played, let's say, 40 games, literally half the season, won the MVP award. A lot of people would say that he doesn't deserve it. And rightfully so, because he doesn't deserve it. There's a lot of players right now that are playing 60, 70 games that, reaches that benchmark where it's like, okay, I understand how consistent they were across the season. And right now, there's really only 4 people who are actually even close to becoming an MVP, and that is Giannis, that is Joel, that is Jokic, and that's pretty much it. There's really not anybody else that's close. I mean, sometimes people will throw around the name of Anthony Edwards and maybe even Tyrese Halliburton, but in the serious contention of actually winning the MVP award, there's nobody who's doing it big like these people. And Joel Embiid is a clear runaway right now with the way that we describe the MVP award than, a Giannis or even like a Jokic that we have right now. And so we're having players who consistently are showing up and showing out. And this is where I really want to get to the big crux of things, right? The big crux of things is that a lot of stars think too much about their money, and they also think about the health implications of them trying to actually play to win the MVP award. Well, one thing that should be said is that should you be playing to win the MVP award or should you play to win games? And now listen, to be honest, it's a little bit both. Right? Because at one point, yes, you do want to win games, and winning games is definitely going to make your MVP bid a lot better. But also, the individual selfish desire of wanting to be an MVP, wanting to be the best player, crown the best player in the regular season is something that has a lot of pride for a lot of NBA players. And so I understand the desire, the necessity to want to play games, not for winning, mind you, not for trying to get the best seeding, but essentially trying to get the best stats to prove your case. Now, is that necessarily wrong? I mean, it depends on your school of thought. I think that both kind of go 2 and 2 together, but for me, the biggest thing is actually just winning games and winning a championship, and whatever you do to facilitate that the best way you possibly can, that's exactly the route that you need to go. But a lot of other people will say, hey, no, you actually do need to, play for the MVP. Or if you do play for the MVP, you're selfish and you're just stat padding, i.e. what a lot of people were saying when Russell Westbrook was with the Washington Wizards and how he didn't win the MVP there, even though he was averaging a triple-double. And so winning does count. But what also should count as well? Playing. You actually playing. Because if your team is winning a lot of games without you, yes, that doesn't mean that you don't have the same amount of MVP star caliber impact. It also just means that your team is really, really good and that they can win without you. Same with how Memphis, for a lot of their years, was winning a lot of games without Ja Morant, and is still continuing to do so right now. Probably not so much right now. But that single component of playing games and being active in the season is something that we should all just expect from our stars. I feel like fans and the players have a divide on what we view as MVP. Now, I did look back at the MVP awards and I said, okay, cool. Maybe the players have a little bit of a point, and maybe we're being really unfair in our assessment of how we should crown MVPs. And so what I did was I looked back at all the MVPs in the last decade, and I paid attention to the amount of games they played, and to see if that there was going to be any disqualifications based on them not meeting the 65 game requirement. And you'd be surprised to see that there's only one person who did not meet that 65 game requirement, and that was Giannis Antetokounmpo. And he missed it one year by 2 games, another year by 4. So he was really, really close. So that means in that whole decade that only one person would have been disqualified. Every single other person, from LeBron James to Kevin Durant to Stephen Curry to James Harden, to a whole bunch of cats, they've all kind of met that 65 game requirement. And I think that's the reason why they chose 65 games, because they know what's actually feasible for a lot of these players. Since there's a lot of times where, like even Russell Westbrook, where he played 81 games to win his MVP award. Even Giannis, even though he didn't make it, right? He still played 63, 61 games. That's a lot of games, right? And it does also prioritize your health and also prioritize you being on the court, you doing the necessary things off the court for you to be healthy. Because we never talk about what players do off the court and how they prepare for the game, partially because, listen, we don't really know. But we do understand that there are players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant who by most of their career has been extremely healthy with a few, ticky-tack injuries, and also, well, one for Kevin Durant, a big injury. But outside of that one freak accident, Kevin Durant has been relatively healthy. And so there are definitely mechanisms out there for you to continue to be healthy throughout the season. Now, if you want to talk about the actual scheduling of the games, to make the scheduling of the games a little bit more easier and more feasible for the players so that they don't, run into the risk of actually getting hurt from playing multiple back-to-back night games, since they almost always play one back-to-back set of games once a week or once every 2 weeks, then that's a different conversation. And I think that's a conversation that definitely needs to be had, because if you're going to place such a value on playing multiple games in a season, you definitely have to place a lot of value on making sure that the games within the season makes sense, that you're not actually running players down and running players dry and pushing them into injuries, not because they're actually playing the games what they should be playing, but they're playing the games in a very disadvantaged position, coming from playing the night before, traveling, and then playing the day after with very minimal rest. That is completely beside the point of actually playing for an MVP award. And the MVP award is already a vague subject. It's already a vague concept because there is really no rules for it. Is winning definitely impacts it? Absolutely. But winning only impacts it to a certain degree. Once everybody else is in the same kind of threshold for winning, it doesn't really matter anymore. What do you look at? Do you look at defense? Nobody really looks at defense. Do you look at offense? Everybody looks at offense, but what type of offense? Do you look at scoring? Do you look at assists? Do you look at rebounding? Do you look at hockey assists? Do you look at offensive rating? What do you look at? Do you look at assist turnovers? There is a lot of things that is definitely should be looked at and should be marked that I don't think a lot of, let's say, like the media members take advantage of, because for some reason the media members are actually the ones that is voting on this, which makes it a little bit more nefarious when you think about that a lot of these media members have biases and not actually picking players that supposed to win, but picking players that they like, just like everybody else. But the problem with that is that it doesn't lead it up to being objective or as objective as you possibly can. Of course, there are players that will definitely separate themselves away from the others. But when it's really close, like this year between Jokic and Embiid, you kind of question, okay, cool, how do we actually measure this? Right? And then we also have Giannis, who's been a monster, a secret monster throughout the whole year. And we'll get to that a little bit later in a different video. But how do you actually quantify this? Is there a way to even quantify this? Is there simple benchmarks that you need on a chart level, on a graphic level that you need to hit for you to actually qualify for MVP? Part of me wants to say yes, but another part of me wants to say no, because then it still comes down to, hey, there's a lot of people who are just going to try to game the system just to hit those benchmarks to say that they hit it. And then, and then it becomes a question of, are you actually stat padding or are you actually winning games for the sake of winning games? But I think as fans, we can quite clearly tell whether or not a player is actually playing to win or players actually stat padding. A lot of times the conversation gets thrown out of whack when we see like great games night in and night out basis, but because they're not winning in an effective manner, we think that they're stat padding. But I think it's more so, hey, are you actually like getting people out the way to get the rebound? Are you actually shooting shots that's actually efficient? Or are you just doing things because you know it's a numbers game and you need that contract renewal? But at the end of the day, I think it's a completely ridiculous notion that we have to be upset at 65 games for players to even qualify for the MVP. And it's really just one award. And if it's going to cost you millions because you're not healthy, that is on you, because you being healthy is part of your job. If you're not healthy and you're not on the court, you should not be incentivized for that. And that doesn't mean that you should play hurt. Of course, prioritize your health in any way that you can. But when there are other players who aren't taking any nights off and consistently putting up MVP caliber numbers, we have to really take genuinely an interest to those players versus the players who's not even playing. And so to say that the only quantifiable thing that we have to even measure the MVP award is ridiculous, it's such a silly notion, and I think it's not even something that should be even taken remotely serious, and that I think a lot of players should just stop whining and then also just get healthy and continue to play better. If you don't make it, that's fine, because there are other players, especially with how talented the league is, there are other players who are way much more deserving to win MVP than you.